Papers about blew away. Hey, you're here for your post-read video from chapter 11. I hope you liked it. I thought this was one. It's starting to get a little more interesting, isn't it? Let's see. Let me find my page so I can read the quote to you. Bethink thee, man, said the captain, thou speakest of a Jew, of an Israelite, an unapt to restore gold as the dry sand of his deserts, to return the cup of water which the pilgrims spilled upon them. So what he's saying is, a Jew would not or could not repay gold as much as you could pick up water that you would spill out in the desert. They don't think very highly of Jews, do they? That's really sad, isn't it? Because they're, God's chosen people. Think about all the undue, mean. And that's not even a good word that the Lord's people have had to endure just because they're the Lord's people. And some of them, that aren't Messianic Jews, that's sadly a lot of Christians' excuse to treat them so poorly is because they don't believe in Christ, because they've turned their back on God. And they might not have really turned their back on God. They just don't understand how Jesus is the Messiah. Their eyes haven't been opened in that way yet. And so you shouldn't treat them any worse than any other person who doesn't see that Jesus is the Messiah. Their eyes just haven't been opened in that way. They've been deceived. They're being deceived by the deceiver, by the father of lies. And so, Satan. And so, we can't blame them. Some people choose to go the opposite way. They see all the evidence and their heart is hard, and they just choose to go a different way. They choose to believe whatever. Some are deceived. And I'm not sure not all of them are deceived, but a majority, I believe. There's a group of people that are deceived. And I believe if you have an Orthodox Jew who is still seeking God, but his eyes aren't open, or her eyes aren't open to the fact that Jesus is the Messiah, I think they've just been deceived. Their heart's not completely against God. So we should love them. Because, they're not going to see or know God's love or Jesus' love if we hate them and call them infidels and say horrible, mean things about them. But I wanted to know what you thought about that quote, if you got it. Let's see. And then he went, on the, he went from knave to yeoman. Let's see. There was a captain. Let's see. It's when Girth gets, he's being held captive by a captain, and he wallops him a good one, and he says, knave. But then he goes from knave to yeoman. So he goes from like a slave, servant, almost dog term to almost a equal term. And I thought that was pretty interesting, that, once the captain saw what he really did, he's like, I think he's telling the truth. So I thought that was interesting. And then, so they want to know who the disinherited knight is, and the gang is upset because the captain restores everything to him. And they're like, but why? And he says, why, thou fool, answers the captain. Is he not poor and disinherited as we are? Doth he not win his substance at the sword's point as we do? So he fights some battles and wins by his ability of his sword, just the same as we do. Hath he not beaten Front de Boeuf and Mavelum? I can't even remember how you say it at this point, and my tongue is tied. I'm sorry. So even as they would beat them if they could. So if they were in a place where they could go challenge these two to a duel or to a joust, they would. But the disinherited knight has put himself in a place where he can, and he has prevailed. And so he's saying, is he not the enemy to life and death of Brian de Bois-Guilbert, whom they have so much reason to fear? Because remember, Brian de Bois-Guilbert is a lord. He's a feudal lord, but he got there not by he's not a Saxon, he's a Norman. And so the vassals, which is who these guys are subject to his rules, what he says. And so the disinherited knight has gone up against him and beat him. And he's like, why would we not restore what's his? Because he's one of us, is really what he's saying. And we're all this otherwise, wouldst thou have us show a worse conscience than an unbeliever, a Hebrew Jew? So he's saying, even if all of that weren't so, would we stand in a place to be showed up by a Jew? Because it said that Jews love their money, and there's a reason for that. I mean, sometimes stereotypes are true, but they are, God blesses them. You can't say they're not blessed, I don't think. But they're also they've gained the spot of having a stereotype of them of being money grubbers and hoarders and hanging on to their money and loving their money more than their fellow man. And so the captain of this group of thieves is saying, this Jew restored all of the disinherited's money. I'm not going to be behind them. And what's more is it was the woman Jew, the Jewess who did it. So they weren't going to be upped by an unbelieving Jew who was a woman. That's what it comes down to. That's why they restored that and all the other things. But it came down to that very last point of they weren't going to be outdone by an unbelieving Jew who loves their money more than they do their fellow man. So that's why they gave them back their money. Okay, that's it for the post video, I do believe. I think we covered everything else in the pre-video. I will see you in the next video for your lessons. I love you.